Do you know the 14 traits of successful chiropractors? We've interviewed some of the top chiropractors in the industry and have identified the common traits that they all share. Jump on over to www.chirobusinessmojo.com to get your free report today.
Welcome to the Chiro Business Mojo podcast, where we deconstruct the methods, marketing, and mindset of successful business people and chiropractors from around the world. And now your host, Dr. Richard Day.
Hello, I am Dr. Richard Day, and this is the Chiro Business Mojo podcast. So nice to be with you once again, and especially nice today because this is our 100th episode. That's right, I am so proud to bring you episode 100 of this podcast. It has not been that long ago that we started it, but it has been my privilege and honor to bring it to you every week. We've had so many great guests. I've learned a ton, and I hope you have as well. Our audience globally continues to grow, and I hear back from practitioners all the time, those guys who are in practice and those girls who are doing it every day and what it is bringing to their practices and their lives. And you know what? I hear from students too. It's really touching them and inspiring them and giving them some great ideas on how to take our profession forward. So thank you, all of you, for checking us out. So without further ado, let's get to our next guest. He is Dr. Marty Rosen. Dr. Rosen graduated in 1981 summa cum laude from Life Chiropractic College, and since then he's practiced in Wellesley, Massachusetts as a family pediatric chiropractor. Over the past 34 years, he's taught pediatrics, craniopathy, SOT, practice management, and chiropractic philosophy nationally and internationally to thousands of chiropractors and students alike. While lecturing and teaching to chiropractors and the public, he's compiled thousands of hours of presentations on chiropractic technique, research, and evidence-based protocols. His unique approach to chiropractic and the care of the pediatric population is evidenced in his published books, DVDs, and professional articles. If you aren't getting the sense already, this guy is the real deal. Currently, besides his own seminar programs, he's teaching for the International Pediatric Chiropractic Association and as part of their advanced certification program. His books include the Pediatric Participant Guide for SOT, the Pediatric SOT, Spinal Adjusting Manual, the SOT Pediatric Cranial Adjusting Manual, and he's written a chapter on pediatric adjusting entitled Sacro-Occipital Technique in the second edition of Chiropractic Pediatrics. And his new book, Pediatric Chiropractic Care, was released in March of 2015. His educational DVDs are designed to assist the practitioner in learning beginning, intermediate, and advanced spinal, cranial, and soft tissue chiropractic adjusting techniques. Welcome, Dr. Marty Rosen.
How are you doing today, Dr. Day?
I am doing great. It is so nice to have you with us here today. We're excited about this interview, and looking forward to talking to you about your experiences. Before we get there, though, are there any gaps you want to fill in that bio?
No, it covers enough. You know, we'll fill in the gaps, I think, as we go along and talk. I think that was enough for now. It's a good start.
Well, good. Let's go back to the beginning. Let's go back to when you graduated from, let's go even further back, before graduation. Why did you want to become a chiropractor?
So I got introduced to chiropractic when I was around 19 years old by a friend of mine. He said, you got to go see this guy. He's great. He's a chiropractor. I'm like, okay. And we all kind of went. And he had, he didn't have open adjusting rooms, but he used to take 5 of us in one room and adjust us. And at that point in time, I didn't really have any issues or problems. I had always been kind of focusing towards alternative types of care. I'm a child of the 60s. I was born in 1954, so I grew up through the 60s, and this guy was just amazing. His name was Dr. Spina in upstate New York, and his focus was just very intense. He had a very busy office. His wife ran the front desk. It was pay as much as you could afford. He didn't have a box on the wall, but when you went out, you paid whatever you could afford. And 5 of my friends, all of us were living in upstate New York, working actually at a steel plant. I was between school. I had just left college. And the guy was just focused. And there was just something about him that touched actually a number of my friends. Matter of fact, most of them, 4 out of 5 of them who went to him still are under chiropractic care in different modes and they all live in different parts of the country. So as time went on, I kind of was going through my life. I was living out in California in the early, 1976, and I had this really great job in this new business, but it wasn't really satisfying. And the fact is, I was walking back to my bed, and this thought just popped into my head, and it said, you should be a chiropractor. And things just rolled from that moment on. One of my grandparents, my grandmother, had passed away and left me some money. And the woman I had been living with wanted to move back to the East Coast, and she had known about chiropractic, and I just started the ball rolling, and I never looked back. I went back to school to get my prerequisites because I was a political science major with a philosophy minor, which I did to get all my prerequisites, my science classes, and I did that in a year. I took biology, chemistry, and physics, and actually went to Sherman Chiropractic College at first. And went to Sherman Chiropractic College and was imbued with philosophy. My chiropractor at the time was a guy named Joe D'Onofrio, and he was a very straight chiropractor. He really never talked anything but straight chiropractic. I didn't really know there was anything different at that point in time. And my first chiropractor, the guy in upstate New York, was also a straight chiropractor. They just talked about the adjustment, the subluxation, changing human potential, and that was really it. So I went to Sherman, and I met my bride-to-be at Sherman, and we stayed there for a year. We ended up transferring mainly because at that time the political situation was pretty hairy, and the states that we wanted to practice in were closing to Sherman grads, so we transferred to Life because they were one of the only schools that would take our credits without making us start all over again. And that was kind of my road into chiropractic. It was kind of a thought process that came into my head, and things just started to happen, and I never had to look back.
Well, let's go forward in time just a bit. So
Sure.
When you graduated, what was your path between graduation and opening a practice?
So we graduated in 1981. As I said, my wife, who I met in Sherman, we ended up getting married when we were in Georgia at Life. We also were pregnant at the time, and she was from New Hampshire. I was from New York. So we split the difference and decided to move to Massachusetts because we were going to have a family, and we wanted to be in a place where basically family could visit us, but they'd have to kind of let us know first. So I sent out a bunch of resumes to people. I was an SOT practitioner. I started as an upper cervical practitioner, and as time went on, I fell in love with SOT, and I called and wrote letters and stuff to a lot of the SOT practitioners in Massachusetts and interviewed with them, and I got a job with a man named Tom DeVita out in Acton, and my wife at the time was 7 months pregnant. So our focus was to get up there, get a job, have our baby, and then eventually open up a home office and practice together and move on from there. And I did work with Dr. DeVita for about 5 or 6 months. We had the baby. It was a home birth at the time. And I decided at that point, most of it was monetarily, that I wanted to go on my own. And we started looking, and in September of 1982, I opened my office in Wellesley, Massachusetts, and I've been there for 34 years ever since.
Well, obviously you've done quite well over the years. What do you think were the early keys to your success?
So the early keys, you have to remember, this was the 80s, so we didn't have internet, and we didn't have Wi-Fi, and we didn't have anyway, so we hit the streets. Nancy and I, as I said, she was a chiropractor. We had our little baby. We put her in a stroller, and there was a man named Pete Fernandez who used to write How to Build a $1 Million Practice, so one of those books, and had all these things that you could do to build a practice. We went door to door, knocking on people's doors and doing surveys, introducing ourselves. I spoke probably 5 to 7 times a month, anywhere from health clubs to Kiwanis clubs to the Italian American Club. I did tons of outside lectures. We sent out flyers. We did dozens and dozens of mailings to people, letting them know. I ran spinal care classes, which not only do we invite our patients, but we posted flyers in the businesses around town for people to come for that. So we really hit the streets, and we worked pretty much 24/7, marketing our practice, hand to mouth, feet on the ground. I was a good lecturer. It was an easy venue for me to talk to people. So that's pretty much how we built our practice. We met friends who were in different organizations, and they would have us come speak. Shackley clubs. Like I said, I became the chiropractor for several different health clubs. I was a runner at the time, so I joined the Middlesex Striders and the Framingham Track Club. I became their chiropractor. I went to races, did spinal screenings. I mean, really, really, really just put our nose to the grindstone for, the first 5 years, really.
Yeah, that's what it takes to launch. And, I would encourage anyone listening that if things are stagnant and not moving the direction you want in your practice, think about those things that it takes early on to build a practice and start doing them again. And
I think you're right. And the other thing about social media, the bad thing about social media, now I have a pretty good social media presence now. My wife, Nancy Watson, runs it. I mean, we have 5 or 6 different pages, and we have 2 different websites, and we have a pretty good outreach. But it's still that one-on-one thing that makes the difference. If you're getting 20, 30, whatever it is, 40 new patients with social media and you're blowing them off because they're really not getting it, because social media is such a vapid way of communicating that you really every once in a while have to get out there. I know a lot of people do dinners, and have patients do dinners, but lecturing one-on-one, looking people in the eye, I remember doing a lecture to maybe 80 different people. They were all Shackley vitamin salesmen, and I got 25 new patients from them. I did a lecture at a senior citizens organization. Within the next 2 weeks, I got 21 new patients from them. And they were connected. It was much better. For the track clubs, I used to go to races and do spinal screenings. I still have patients 30 years later who I got from those kind of things and from health clubs. So though the social media is a great way to get a large influx, it becomes more about quantity. And I think in the long run, quality is much better. It's much, you have to look at your return of investment. And if you're putting all these hours into social media and you're processing 30, 40 new patients a month and you're keeping 2 or 3 of them, you're spending a lot of time spinning your wheels.
Yeah, that personal touch, I think, just can't be beat. It's nice to build a community online, but the impact that's made person to person or in person to a small group is just much more significant. And I think maybe some of us had gotten away from that, but that's a good skill to have. And outside a lot of people's comfort zone, at least what I find when I talk to folks.
Well, I think, that's a really good point. I like what you said about the comfort zone, because there was a thing that we used to call confrontational tolerance, which is basically your ability to tell the truth in situations where that may be hard for you. And it's the same thing about going outside your comfort zone. And one way to build your practice is to keep coming up against that comfort zone. In the early days, when I moved to Massachusetts, insurance was really easy. Everybody had insurance. They were $250 deductibles. They paid 80/20. I mean, everybody had indemnity insurance. It was really easy. And if you had auto accidents, they paid 100%. And there was a safety in the beginning when people didn't have to put money out of pocket or very little money out of pocket, so you can give them these care plans and all that stuff. I don't take much insurance now. All I take is Blue Cross and Medicare. But as we started to pull away from the insurance, I had to raise my confrontational tolerance because I knew this money was coming out of people's pocket. And I did that for a number of reasons. But again, every time you push your confrontational tolerance by maintaining your integrity, your practice, not only your practice, but your personal life will grow. I mean, it's a tough thing to do, but if you keep pushing that envelope little by little, it's just an amazing process. As the older you get, the easier it gets also.
Yeah, I think there's a reason why my grandfather, could say the things he said. Certain comfort came with it. Well, yeah, such a great point. Well, I want to talk about something else. Now, you do a lot of education.
Yes.
Helping students, with chiropractic technique, be it SOT, pediatrics, things of that nature.
Right.
You come in contact with a lot of those folks. And from a business perspective, what do you see, in terms of people that are maybe struggling in their practices?
I think the number one thing I see these days is that people will put less time into their skill set as the practical application of the technique and more time into marketing and stuff. And I think the problem is that if you don't produce what you say you're going to produce, people are going to disappear. If you tell people that whatever it is, if your philosophy is based on optimum functioning and the innate potential of the human being, that's great, but there has to be some kind of baseline where you can show that you're producing that as opposed to a belief system, and you have to have a skill set. And it's my experience that, and I hear this a lot because some of the stuff I teach may be more integrated or complicated than certain things, that people say, oh, it's too hard, it's too much work. And for me, if you're going to be a chiropractor, or if you're going to do any profession, whether it be a baseball player, an architect, or lawyer, learning your skill set and improving that is probably the number one. We have our triangle of art, science, and philosophy, and I think really the art should weigh the heaviest. I think being able to produce what you say you're going to produce in a way that is quantifiable is probably one of the most important and one of the weakest links in the chiropractic profession, because we spend so much time, biting each other's heads off about which technique is best and which isn't. And it's my experience that the best chiropractors I know are not dependent on their technique. It's dependent on their commitment to their technique, whether they do activator, upper cervical, SOT, Gonstead, whatever it is. The more dedication they put into that art, the more successful their practice is. And that's what I think is lacking.
Yeah, I would agree with that, and definitely your word of mouth is better if you're getting the results that you're intending to get, and
people refer.
You can't beat the referral marketing. I mean, do a great job, and it doesn't cost you a whole lot. You're actually making money taking care of people.
Absolutely. One of the things and one of the precepts I always had when I started my practice, and when someone would come in, is if they had kids somewhere down the line, I would expect to see their children. It was just an expectation that I held. And that's how I built my family practice, is I just expected you eventually, you have a kid, you're going to bring the kid in. I don't care if the kid's 15 or 2 months old. Eventually, if you understand what I'm saying, you're going to bring the kid in. And that's why now we take care of 3, maybe even 4 generations. I do. I have a 4th generation family, but a lot of my families are 3 generations of chiropractic care. Like, I don't market for patients. It's just a constant referral. And if you're pregnant and I'm adjusting you, because I get a lot of referrals from a midwife in the area, if you're pregnant and I'm adjusting you, I just have an expectation and an education that when that kid comes out of the womb, I'm going to see that child. So it's an expectation based on a philosophical construct. And I also, in my case, have the skill set to be able to deal with the pediatric practice. That's something that I specialize in. So I have no qualms about checking a 1-day-old or a 2-month-old or a 15-year-old or anything like that. And I think that's an important factor, is that in your head, whatever it is, if you want to be a sports chiropractor, whatever you want to do, you have to not only have that skill set, but you have to have that concept in your head that, eventually I'm going to see your friend, your neighbor, your aunt, your uncle, because you're going to get the results, you're going to understand what I'm doing, and you're going to want to help these people. That's what you're going to want to do. You're going to want to help the people you care about.
Well, 2 questions that I get a lot from people that are, when they're starting out and people that are really looking to grow are, how do I get more new patients and how do I take better care of the ones that I have? Patient retention. Do you have any advice for those 2?
Yeah. So one of the things that I do, so I'm going to answer the patient retention one because I think it's important. So I run my office by statistics. So I look at my new patients, my patient visit average. I look at my case visit average, how much I'm making per case. And that gives me an idea of how people are responding to my educational process. So if my patient visit average, now every different technique has different, so I don't usually see people 3 times a week. I usually see people 2 times a week. But I haven't practiced a long time, so it doesn't really affect my PVA. But as you're starting out, you want to see over the first couple of years that your patient visit average grows, whether you see people once every 3 months or once a week, whatever it is, because that's letting you know that people are getting the idea of long-term care. So you need to track that. If your patient visit average or your case average are not coinciding a certain way, then somehow your educational process or your results are not up to par. So the other thing that's really important around that is to stop periodically during the patient care. So we stop after 3 weeks to do a progress exam, and then I sit down with the patient and explain what's changed or what hasn't, and I give them a chance to give me feedback. And then before I move them into what I consider reconstructive care, when their intensive care is over, I do a complete re-exam. And then we sit down again. I say, look, this is what we found on your findings when you first came in. This is what's happening now. This is what I would like to see you do over the next several months of care. So you stop and re-educate and check in with the patient each time to see where they're at, to get a sense of where, one person said, doc, maybe after 3 weeks, I feel really great. The pain in my arm is gone. I want to stop care. Then instead of pushing that person into understanding your paradigm, you explain the paradigm a little bit, said, I'd really like to take care of you, but if you want to come back at another date, you're welcome to come back. It's kind of allowing them to make the choice. Most of the time, if your educational process is strong enough, when you first finish your report of findings and you ask the patient, because I ask the patient what type of care they want. Do you want long-term care to correct the problem? Are you looking for short-term care for symptoms? 99% of the time, they say they want long-term care. And that means that I know that I'm at least communicating at that moment in time of what's important. So I think tracking how your patient visit average changes. If you're getting 100 new patients a month and your patient visit average is 6 visits, there's something wrong. There's something wrong. So I think that's a big factor, that you need to be objectifying the goals that you're setting and how your practice is running so that you can really get a sense of what's happening. And then you have to see what you need to tweak. If the patient visit average is dropping, you have to look at yourself. Like, is my technique doing it? Am I doing my progress exams and they're not getting any changes? Is that why they're leaving? Are my fees too high? Is my educational process wrong? Is it my staff that's not scheduling them right? You have to start to look at your practice and see where those linchpins are that are stopping you from growing. And I always start with myself, like, am I in a bad mood? Am I in a bad place in my life? Or am I not speaking my truth? What am I doing? Is my technique off? And then I move on to, the practice. Is my staff supporting what I'm saying? Are the patients understanding? Do I need to change my educational process? Do I need to be more personal? Do I need to be more intense? Less intense? You have to start to really look at yourself objectively and be willing to change. If it's not working, change.
Well, I have a
It's as
question.
simple as that.
I have a question in terms of the educational process. I find that people's attention spans these days is relatively short. And,
I don't. What did you say? I wasn't paying attention. Sorry, I missed what you were saying. Yeah.
So, I do a lot of education, and I can kind of feel the person starting to zone out. And I try to get as brief as I can. I'm always trying to refine that. Is that you find? It sounds like you find the same thing.
Well, there's two things. One thing that you said is really good. And number one, you're aware enough to listen. If you see a person's fading off and you have more things that you wanted to say because you have a pat report of findings and you keep doing that, you're wasting your time. So you have to be aware of the person you're dealing with. Sometimes my report of findings is 2 minutes. Sometimes my report of findings is 8 minutes. It really depends on how engaged the person is. I don't know if you probably know who he was, but years and years ago, Joe Felicia and Guy Reekman started Renaissance, which is now still going on with some other people, but they started Renaissance International. And Joe Felicia was an amazing communicator. And one of the things he always said was the longer amount of time you're spending in your office on your reported findings explaining to your patient what chiropractic is, the less time they're going to stay in your office. And I find that to be true. If you're selling it harder and harder, those people are going to disappear. So what I rather do and what I do in my education process is do it in snippets, short versions. And I make sure that I do it on my daily visits. I make sure they get some education. I do not adjust on the first visit. I don't think that's a good thing chiropractically for a number of reasons, and we could discuss that if you want, but I don't adjust on the first visit. So the first visit is an evaluation. They get some information about the evaluation. They get a little bit of information about chiropractic. The second visit is the report of findings, and at that report of findings, I do show them a brief video so they understand what the subluxation is, and then I go in and give them a specified report of finding based on the clinical findings I found and what their needs are. And then they set up some visits. And then, like I said, their first progress exam is usually 3 weeks into care, and I go over their findings and I re-educate them a little bit, and I do another re-evaluation that could be anywhere from 6 to 8 weeks into care, depending on their visit needs, and I reevaluate and I re-educate again. So it's, like you said, it's not a 45-minute lecture. I don't do spinal care classes anymore, and to be honest, the main reason is I just got tired of hearing myself speak. But even my spinal care classes, I usually try to limit them to about 20 minutes with the patients there. You need to be aware. You need to learn to be aware of your audience. When you're losing them, then stop. Stop. Move on.
Well, I want to go back to something that you mentioned, and that is whether or not you're going to adjust on day one. Now, I've done it both ways, and let's go into that a little bit. Okay. What are your reasons for doing it the second time?
Okay. So my number one reason, if let's say that we're going to talk about patients who have never been under care, all right, and we're not going to talk about referrals, because I do sometimes adjust people. If a friend of mine refers a patient to me, or if they've been under regular care, I'll adjust them on their first visit. But I mean really regular care. Like if they say, I go in once in a while, the last adjustment I got was 6 months, I do a brief exam. But the reason I don't adjust on the first visit is in my paradigm, and in most chiropractic paradigm, if you're looking at the subluxation process, is you're looking for a pattern. You want to find what the subluxation pattern is. So it's impossible to discern a pattern in one visit. That's what I've seen you that day. So what I do is on my second visit, I also go over my positive findings to see what is in that pattern, what neurological findings are congruent that time. So then I can make my adjustment based on that. So let's say it's an adult where I use SOT. So in the SOT paradigm, if you went out and played soccer last week for the first time, and you came in and you had muscle spasms in your back, and you came into my office and your wife said, you got to go see my chiropractor. And I checked you out and you had muscle spasm in your back from playing soccer for the first time in 3 years. That's not a subluxation pattern. That's a compensation pattern. So I evaluate you. I take into account what you have, if I need to take films. And then I say, look, you need to come back within the next day, 2 days, 3 days, whatever it is that you can come back in, so we can reevaluate to see what the underlying pattern is that caused that muscle spasm to happen, because the muscle spasm is just a reaction. And I tell that to the patient. And when they come back in, then I check my underlying indicators so I can make my adjustments. So that's the first reason. I'm looking for at least some pattern. The second reason is that I found if I do it that way, that usually one of three things happen. If I adjust this person who's in spasm, whose wife told him to come in, and the spasm doesn't go away, he's not coming back. Chiropractic doesn't work. I'll go take Advil. I'm going to go see my doctor. It doesn't work, especially even if they get worse. Second thing happens, the spasms all go away and he feels better. 3 days later, he feels great. He goes, I don't need to go back in. I went in for these muscle spasms. They're gone. I feel great. So they don't come back in. Those are the two main things that happen. And the third thing, that he may come in if he felt a little bit better, and he wasn't educated, give you 1 or 2 more visits to see if he feels better or worse. So you lose the ability to educate that person. You lose the ability for that person to understand that chiropractic is not just about putting the Band-Aid on. And you also take the chance that you're making an adjustment into a compensation instead of a subluxation, which can have very negative rebound effects.
Well, I want to shift and talk about marketing a little bit. Do you do your own marketing, or do you hire that
Yes.
out?
We do we do all internal now. All our marketing is internal. But you have to understand, though, in my practice, it's completely referral based. So when you say marketing, we keep aware. All our marketing is internalized. So I still to this day write my own newsletters. I do not farm them out. I write them from scratch once a month, patient newsletters. I also write another newsletter for my other business, my DVDs and my books. For my professional newsletter, I write those newsletters from scratch myself each time. The social media is run mostly by my wife, and we have a page for Wellesley Chiropractic Office, which is our office. I have my own Dr. Marty Rosen page. I have an SOT page. I have a Pediatric page, and I have 1 or 2 other pages. And we constantly put up information that's pertinent to each of those. So we do all that kind of marketing. That's done on a pretty much daily basis. And I don't know what all our pages together probably have about, I'm going to say 12,000 people. I know Wellesley Chiropractic has 3,000. I know my page is maxed out to its 5,000. So we have, thousands of people. Our emails go out. The professional ones go out to about 16 to 18,000 people. My office newsletter is about 1,500. We have the people sign up that they do that. So all our marketing is done pretty much at this point internally. I go and do lectures once in a while if someone asks me to, but I don't look for them anymore. If I was building a practice, I would look to do those kind of outreach lectures. There's tons of places where you can have, you can talk and do 20-minute, half-hour lectures. So that would be something I do. But all our marketing at this point is internal, and my practice is probably 90% referral. We do get some people from our website. People look for us, and I do put my website out, and it's on all my emails. On the bottom of the email, I have all my contacts, my Facebook contacts, my Twitter contacts. So anytime I send an email, all that information's out. And I do have that information also on my card if I give them out. So that's pretty much our entire marketing focus. The other piece is we don't have the ability to get that many more new patients at this point. My practice maxed out, though my daughter's joined the practice, and now she's starting to get a lot of the overflow. But again, she does the same type of marketing. We do some Facebook stuff. She does, she's going to do some work. She's a yoga instructor as well, so she may go to certain yoga classes or teach certain yoga courses. We do some, but everything we keep pretty close to in-house, because I find the return of investment that way is much higher and much easier to control, and the quality of the patient, because they have a contact with our office, is much higher than just blasting things out to 100,000 different people.
Do you take insurance?
The only insurance I take right now is Blue Cross, Blue Shield, and Medicare. I don't take any other insurance, including personal injury. If people have personal injury problem, and they come in, then they pay me, and they can get the money from their lawyer. I've had a couple of people have, issues with that, and I just said, look, I don't have a contract with your insurance company. You pay me, and your lawyer can argue with you or the insurance company. So that's it. Blue Cross Blue Shield and Medicare is all we take right now.
Well, what's the reasoning behind the PI case? Did you have a bad experience?
I don't particularly like working with lawyers. I've had a number of experiences where I've taken care of people. Now, I don't have different fees. Like, I know some chiropractors who do PI, their fees are slightly higher for the personal injury cases. My fee is my fee. So I've had lawyers call me up, people who have been hurt, got well, and they say, oh, Doc, I didn't quite get as much as I thought for this case, and, would you take $1,000 instead of $1,500? And I'm like, no. And they said, well, I got to tell you, if you want to wait that $1,500, it may take a year to settle this, but I can, it's just all that stuff. The other thing is it's there. It's no different than any indemnity insurance. Just you got in a car accident. I get it. They cover you, but that's your contract with the insurance company. That's not mine. So even patients of mine, I have patients of mine who are, let's say, Blue Cross patients. They get in a car accident. We stop the Blue Cross. They pay me cash. They collect. I don't want to deal with insurance. When I had insurance practice, I had 3 people doing insurance at one time. Now I have one person who does it, just a couple of hours a week, bills Blue Cross and Medicare, and that's it. It's not my job to deal with it. And the other piece on a philosophical construct, insurance companies are not designed to really cover chiropractic care if you're dealing with a lifetime long-term care practice. Their job is to deal with acute care, acute injuries, and when that's over, that's it. So since my practice is, at this point in my time, 80% maintenance care, how can I rationalize billing somebody who's coming in once every 2 weeks for maintenance care to the insurance company? Yeah.
No, I agree with you. I mean, I've also found, I guess I'll add to that it differs state to state, region to region.
Right.
There's somewhere you've got to be in there because, the major employer, you're going to see 80% of the people that come from there and they all have this certain insurance.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think insurance is a way to, the paperwork's a pain. Honestly, if you can get away from it, your life will be much simpler and much happier. You won't be ready. I can't remember somebody asked me for a narrative. A lawyer asked me for a narrative on a patient of mine. I said, I don't have anything in this narrative that's going to help you. I don't really want to write it. And so I can't remember the last time I wrote a narrative. I've sent some insurance. I've sent notes to insurance companies. They ask for certain reviews. I've done that. But most of the time my insurance work is done when I leave the office. I write a diagnosis and I'm gone. It's hard. You're right. It depends where you work. If you're in a working class community and the town is, mostly manufacturing and those people have insurance and they belong to an HMO, you need to get in because, right, a lot of people won't be able to come in. But, where do you draw that line then as you're practicing of when you're actually overstepping what the insurance is willing to pay for or is contracted to pay for? And how do you educate that person to keep coming in on whatever it is, a monthly basis or bi-monthly, but whatever your maintenance care is, once they're out of pain, when you tell them that their insurance company is not going to pay, it's a hard sell.
Yeah, it's hard to get to pay for something you were getting free, that's for sure.
Exactly. That's how people see it. It's free, and why would I pay you?
Well, this show is all about providing actionable content for our listeners. So do you have a single piece of advice for the new doc and for the doc who's experienced but maybe stuck?
Yeah. So for the new doc, you have to be willing to put more time into building your practice, and I highly suggest setting some goals or even focus spots of where you want to be and taking the time out of your personal life. My experience a lot of times with younger docs is they don't want to work as hard as the older docs, or they don't want to work as much as their parents, but they still want to get the same benefits. And I think you're going to have to take some time. I would say if you're good at what you do, that within 2 years, maybe 3 years, you can build a practice that's pretty much generating itself with little pushes. You have to keep pushing, the boulder up the hill a little bit. So I think is to really delineate specific time when you're going to work on your practice, set up some kind of plan, like what's your strength? Is your strength social media? Then use that. Is your strength talking to people? Then use that. Is your strength, going into different communities? Is your strength athletics? Use that. Find what your strength is to communicate how people tend to gravitate towards you and focus on that strength. Set very specific goals about what you would like to do. Be objective about those goals. And if you're not making them, be objective about why that process is not occurring. Look to yourself first to see what you can change to make the process, because you're going to be the driving force. You're the motivating force in your practice. You're the driving force, regardless of your staff. You're that driving force. So really be willing to put in the time to do that, focus, and find where your strengths are. For the older doc, the same thing, except that you have to remember you're never going to have to stop pushing the boulder. It's that whole thing about inertia. If you let the boulder stop and you stop your marketing and your internal educating, you stop all that completely, then you're going to have to push twice as hard to get that thing moving once the inertia stops. So constantly keep tapping that little boulder, keep moving it, change things up. For the older doc, find something else. What I used to do when I got bored is I would find new techniques or skill sets. Like for a while I wanted to do sports injuries, so I took seminars with a guy named Leroy Perry, and I learned all this sports stuff. And my daughter was a gymnast, so I became their team trainer, and I worked with a couple of colleges in the area, and I helped them as a team trainer. I got into that. After a while I found sports boring, and my passion ended up being pediatrics, so I learned how to do pediatrics. I got involved more with midwives in the area. I got more involved with people. I got involved with people who are homeschoolers. So I found things that interested me, and I got involved in those communities. And from those communities, just being an example of what chiropractic is, I moved through that. So if you're in practice a while and you feel a little stagnated, maybe find a new technique. I did a couple of other technique seminars that I wanted to take. I did some network seminars. I did some activator seminars. I did different seminars to see if they fit or helped to motivate me. I kept going back to SOT because I loved it. I always took SOT seminars. You need to interact with other like-minded chiropractors. So periodically, a couple of times a year, you need to take a seminar, technique seminar. Even if you take one pearl out of that technique seminar, that'll revitalize your practice. That's kind of what I did. For older docs, you have to keep it. It's no different than any other relationship. It's no different than a marriage. You have to find things as you grow older, as your kids get older. Like I heard you say you have 3 kids under the age of 4?
Yeah.
So you're just you're treading water, man. You're just surviving. So have a good time, but eventually your kids are going to get older, going to need you less, and that relationship's going to change. But you're going to want to stay connected to your children, so you're going to find things that connect you. I had daughters that were into dance and gymnastics. I was a hockey player, so I had to learn to get involved in the dance world. So I got involved in their dance studio. I started taking care of the dancers. I took care of, the ballet teachers, and I took care of the jazz teachers, and I got involved in their shows. So it's no different in your practice. You find those inroads that keep you in that relationship, just like you would in any other relationship, that keeps that relationship interesting, keeps that relationship growing. The stagnation in your practice is usually because of personal stagnation. You're bored, you're doing the same thing, you're tired of the same patients, you're tired of hearing the same complaints. Change your educational process, up the ante. Find a different way to communicate with your patients that seems more real to you.
Well,
those are the kind of things.
Well, those are great advice. What I'm going to do is I'm going to list it all out, and we're going to include that in our show notes when this episode airs.
Okay.
Right now I want to shift away from chiropractic or success in chiropractic and really go up to the 30,000-foot view of success in life in general. And obviously you've been very successful over the years. Mm-hmm. We learn a lot from our successes, but we can learn even more from the challenges or failures we've had. Would you share one of those with us and how you overcame it?
It's interesting. I was actually talking to my wife this morning about this, and we've all had challenges. We all have challenges. I've had I broke a hip. We've had relationship challenges. You have things with your children, family, members passing on. But as far as great challenges, I really think that for me, the challenge is my headset and my ability to be able to balance my life. So chiropractic has been a big part of my life, and there have been times where I've totally been so focused in chiropractic that everything else was pushed aside, whether it be my relationships, whether it even be my health, pushing through things that maybe I shouldn't. So I think that the biggest challenge in chiropractic, because it is a tough profession, there's no doubt about it. We're on the outside looking in a lot of the time, and even our own profession doesn't have a lot of congruency or support, is to learn ways to maintain balance, to learn ways to be able to take care of yourself within the venue of still pushing forward, making your goals, and making a difference. So I think for chiropractors, the biggest challenge is that constant barrage from our profession internally and the external barrage, and to be able to rise above that. What was it, last month was it, that woman, the model who got her neck, got a stroke. So he got a stroke from a chiropractor. Yeah. That was and patients were coming in, and you have to talk about that. And so the biggest challenge, I think, is to find a positive way to show people the benefits of what you do, and at the same time, constantly maintain a balance within your life so that you don't actually get dragged down into much, that you don't get depressed or it doesn't weigh down on you, and get rid of, the other things are the monkeys on your back, the things that you may have done wrong and the mistakes you made. Learn to process through those and move and forgive yourself. That's the other thing. I'm really hard on myself, and there are times where that's been very detrimental to me, and you have to learn to basically forgive yourself and move on through those kind of things. I will say we're very lucky. We never had really big financial challenges. We were in the black after the first month in practice. We worked really hard. So we didn't have those like my biggest health issue was 3 years ago I broke my hip. And I was out of the practice for 9.5 weeks because I had to stay off my leg. So that was a big challenge. We've lost all 4 of our parents. Every time that happens, that's a challenge that you have to rise above and move through it. So to move through life's standard challenges by keeping some kind of balance, I think is the hardest part, especially in practice, because people are depending on you. When you go into your office, they don't really care what's happening to you. They want you to take care of them. And so to separate that place and to understand that they're there for you to help them, and whatever you're going through has to be kind of a little bit pushed aside, but not pushed aside to the point where you don't deal with it in another way or another shape or another form.
Well, do you have any daily habits, rituals, or affirmations that you do every day that help you be more successful in life?
I'm a guy of routine, so I would say my biggest thing for me, besides going into my practice, is a healing environment for me. If I'm feeling crappy, or if I'm sad, or I'm sick, I go in and I find this place. It's a meditative place where I'm really just in the zone. And when I'm practicing, I'm in the zone. I don't take phone calls when I am in my practice. I see patients constantly. The only thing I break for is lunch. Nothing interrupts me when I'm there with my patients. My staff knows that. They don't interrupt me. So that's a meditative practice that I do. The other thing that I think is really important for me is I'm a very physical guy, so I exercise. I try and do it 4 times a week, but anywhere, if I'm traveling a lot, maybe not, but 2 to 4 times a week, some kind of exercise. That's how I help burn off my extra energy. So that is something I've done. I think I started exercising when I was 12 years old, regularly exercise. I remember I got my first set of weights when I was 12 years old. So I think exercising is really important. I think that finding a way to find different meditative states in what you do. I think when you're in your office, if you can find that place, in Zen we used to call it the observer, the guy who sits back there and watches what's going on without judgment. Find that place where you can actually objectively, and I do that a lot, I try and find the place where I can objectify the situation, see both ends of it, see what both people are thinking, and then kind of move through it. So I'd say those are my meditative practice is my adjusting, finding that objective place, which I try to do every day so I can see both sides of the situation, and on a physical level, exercising. And if that doesn't work, once in a while vodka helps.
Well, I'll try to do more of the exercising and less of the vodka.
Yeah, definitely. It's definitely better. More of the vodka is not. Usually when it's more of the vodka, something's wrong. Right. But yeah, I would say those are my biggest patterns in life, how I do that.
Well, we are nearing the finish line of this interview, but I do have some final thoughts before we let you go.
Okay. Do
you have a favorite book you'd like to recommend for our listeners?
It's funny you said no, I don't. I mean, what comes to mind, which is kind of crazy for me, is Major DeJarnette wrote a book called The Science, Art, and Philosophy of Sacral Occipital Technique. He wrote it in 1967, and I love that book because he talks so much about chiropractic and its global effect and the subluxation, and this was in the 60s. So that's kind of my favorite technique book. But I don't have a novel or anything like that. I've read some of Bruce Lipton's stuff. I like his work, Louise Hay stuff, but I don't have one particular book that I can actually recommend. I can recommend my book, Pediatric Chiropractic Care. I like that one. But no, I don't have one that I can actually really give you except for what I've just kind of gone through.
Well, what's the best business advice anyone's ever given you?
Keep your overhead low keep your expectations rational and work really, really hard when you're working and stay focused. I had two people. One was Greg Stanley, a guy who ran Whitehall Management, who was a master at overhead control. So the lower your overhead, the less of a nut that you have to make, the less stress there is, because making money, even making a lot of money, is stressful. And if you have to spend a lot of that money just to survive, it's extremely stressful. So as far as business, keep your overhead as low as possible. Be willing to work as hard as you can. And the other person who gave me probably the best advice ever in my life was my dad. And my dad always said to me, there's always going to be someone smarter than you, stronger than you, faster than you, bigger than you, richer than you. He goes, none of that matters. He goes, do the best you can in every situation so that when you leave that situation, you feel like you gave it your all. And when you feel that way, that is your success. That is the way to do it. And that's the way I ran my business. So I don't compare myself with the guy down the street. I don't compare myself with the person around the corner. I don't care if they make more money, less money than me. It's really about doing my best, looking back and knowing that I made that and made those choices. And again, in your business, I think that's really important to do that. Don't start comparing yourself with other people. You're your own benchmark. If you're satisfied making $250,000 a year and the guy down the street is making $750,000 a year, doesn't matter. I have a short story. I think this is poignant for that. So I have a patient who's a multi-millionaire. He's probably worth, last time I looked, he's probably worth about $750 million. And he's an older gentleman. He's in his 70s now, and he came in a couple of months ago, and he was really stressed about his business, and he was really stressed about what was going on. And I said to him, John, why are you doing this? I mean, you're in your 70s. I know you're set for life. You own 4 homes. And I said, why are you doing this? He goes, well, 2 reasons. He said, one, I do it because I love what I do. He's a fund manager. He goes, I love what I do. And it keeps my mind active. I said, I get that. I said, that's great. You could do it. I said, but why do you have to do it at this level? He goes, because if I go to dinner with friends and I'm sitting around a table and I'm sitting there and I know I'm worth, $750 million, and the guy across me is worth $900 million, and the guy next to him is worth $1.2 billion, and the guy next to him is worth $1.5 billion. He goes, sometimes I feel less than. And I looked at him and I said, man, that's really, really messed up. You need to work on that. I said, when I hit my first $750 million and I feel less than somebody, my next step is a psychologist's office. And I think that's the sign of it. It's like you can't keep comparing yourself to the next person, because there is always going to be somebody bigger, greater, smarter, faster, which is what my father taught me a long time ago, to never do that and just do what you do, stay focused in your world, and know that you're doing the best you can at that moment in time, and be willing to look at yourself if things aren't working the way you want, and be willing to be objective enough to see what you need to change.
That is great advice, and thank you so much for sharing all the great advice that we have covered today. I think we've touched on a lot of things.
Sure.
What's the best way for people to connect with you and find out more about your lectures and your DVDs?
Sure. So for chiropractors who want to find out about my lecture series, my seminars, and my DVDs, go on my website, which is drmartinrosen.com, and it has all my DVDs, and we're actually putting them online again now so they can be downloadable, and it has my books, my DVDs, all my lectures. So that's, again, Dr. Martin, M-A-R-T-I-N, Rosen, R-O-S-E-N.com. And if you want to find more information about my practice, then my office website is Wellesley, W-E-L-L-E-S-L-E-Y, Chiro, C-H-I-R-O.com. And that does have some of my seminars. You can link that to my other website, but you can also see my educational stuff is on that, stuff about pediatrics, and there's some videos and other things on that. So those are the 2 places I think you can go, and they all link to, my Facebook pages and my YouTube and all that. So the drmartinrosen.com is professionals, WellesleyChiro.com is patients, lay people, but professionals, of course, you can go on it, look at our newsletters, you can download some of them if you want, and, be willing to use. I'm happy to let you use them in your office if you want to.
Well, Dr. Marty Rosen, thank you so much for spending your time with us here today and sharing all the information and insight you have with our listeners. And it's been a pleasure having you on the show.
It's been great. It was great talking to you, and I appreciate you reaching out, and I'll be looking forward to seeing you making more of a dent in the chiropractic profession.
Thanks for listening to the Chiro Business Mojo podcast at www.chirobusinessmojo.com.